Picture the World Cup final. 100,000 people on their feet. The best players alive chasing a single ball across the grass while 4 billion more watch from every corner of the planet. Now wind the clock back. Not 100 years, not 500, more than 2,000. Because the truth is, the game you love wasn't born in England in a tidy room full of Victorian gentlemen. It was already ancient by then, and the first people to play it for real weren't footballers at all. They were soldiers. This is the story of how ancient humans invented soccer. Ask almost anyone where football comes from, and they'll point to England in 1863, the year the Football Association was founded, and the modern rules were finally written down. And that's true for the game in its current shape. But here's the part even die-hard fans rarely know. Football's own governing body, FIFA, doesn't trace the sport's roots to England at all. It traces them to ancient China, to a game played when Rome was still a republic and the Great Wall was still being raised. The first footballers were keeping a ball in the air while Julius Caesar was a child. So how far back does this really go? Further than you'd ever guess. Our story starts in China, more than 2,000 years ago, in a violent stretch of history known as the Warring States period. Rival kingdoms were locked in near constant war, and a kingdom's survival depended on the fitness of its soldiers. Somewhere in that pressure cooker, a training drill was born. To sharpen agility, balance, and footwork, soldiers were made to kick a ball and keep it off the ground using only their feet, their chests, their shoulders, anything but their hands. They called it Cuju, which simply means kickball. The earliest written record of it appears in a text from that era, describing the game already being played in the prosperous state of Qi. Let that sink in. The very first time soccer shows up in human writing, it isn't described as some brand new invention. It's already popular. Already something people did for the sheer joy of it, and it only grew. By the time of the Han dynasty, Cuju had escaped the army camp and conquered everyday life. This is the moment it stops being a drill and becomes a sport you would actually recognize. There were teams, there were rules. There was a field with goals. In the classic version, players tried to kick the ball through a small opening in a raised net, never using their hands, while the other side fought to stop them. Sound familiar? It should. Strip away the hoop and you've basically described the beautiful game. Picture it. A packed courtyard, 2 teams in formation, a leather ball arcing through the air off the side of someone's foot, and a crowd roaring with every near miss. That scene was real, and it was happening 2 millennia ago. Children kicked the ball in the streets. Generals played it to unwind after war. It cut across every layer of society, from the dirt-poor villager to the emperor on his throne. Exactly the way the sport does now. Here's where it gets wild. Cuju wasn't some casual backyard pastime. Ancient China built an entire professional ecosystem around it, more than 1,000 years before anyone in Europe dreamed of a football league. There were professional players who did nothing else for a living. There were paying spectators who packed in to watch. There were organized competitions and club-like structures. Emperors were obsessed. Some ran the country by day and played Cuju by night. And it wasn't only men. Women played too, sometimes in their own matches that drew their own crowds. One of China's most beloved poets, writing in the Tang dynasty, fondly looked back on kicking the ball around with his children years before, proof that this was a game woven into ordinary family life, the same way a kickabout in the park is today. There's even a piece of technology hiding in this story that you are still using every single weekend. The earliest Cuju balls were stuffed solid, but at some point Chinese craftsmen did something revolutionary. They built an inflatable ball, an air-filled bladder sealed inside a leather shell. That idea, the ball that flies and bounces because it's full of air, is one of the most important inventions in the history of sport. It traveled out of China along the Silk Road, and its descendants now sit in every stadium and every schoolyard on Earth. When a striker bends a free kick into the top corner, he's using an idea that was born in ancient China. For a while, Cuju only got bigger. Centuries later, during the Song dynasty, it reached its golden age. Matches spilled into public squares, schools, and temple courtyards, and there were professional clubs and something close to celebrity players. And then, slowly, it faded. Later rulers fell out of love with it, dismissing it as a lazy distraction, and after centuries at the very heart of Chinese culture, Cuju slipped into the shadows and was nearly forgotten. It took until 2004 for the modern football world to formally bow to its ancestor, when FIFA officially recognized Cuju as the earliest form of the game. 2,000 years after those first soldiers, the sport finally admitted where it came from. But China was never alone. The urge to kick a ball seems to bubble up wherever humans gather. In ancient Greece, people played a rough, scrambling game called episkiros, closer to a chaotic blend of football and rugby. The Romans had their own version, harpastum, and turned it into a brutal test of strength and stamina. Soldiers reportedly used it to stay battle-ready, which means once again the roots of the game run straight back to the army. Across the sea in Japan, a gentler, almost graceful cousin appeared called kamari, where the goal wasn't to beat an opponent at all, but to keep the ball aloft together for as long as possible, more like a ceremonial dance than a contest. But if you want the version that'll make your skin prickle, you have to cross the ocean to the Americas. For thousands of years, the great civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztecs, and those before them, played a ball game on enormous stone courts, some of which you can still walk through today. They used a solid rubber ball, heavy enough to break bones, and moved it with their hips and bodies. And here's the chilling part. For these cultures, the game could be far more than sport. It was bound up with religion, with the cosmos, with life and death itself. And in some cases, historians believe the losers, or by some accounts even the winners, may have been ritually sacrificed. Sit with that. The worst a modern player faces is a penalty shootout. These players may have been competing for their lives. The evidence is genuinely debated, and not every match ended in blood. But the fact that a ball game could ever carry that kind of weight tells you something staggering about how deep this instinct runs in us. The crowds that pack a stadium today, the chants, the heartbreak of a loss. The ancients felt all of it too, just with stakes we can barely imagine. So where does England actually come in? By the Middle Ages, Europe was full of wild, lawless village football, mobs booting a ball through the streets between whole towns, games so violent and disruptive that kings repeatedly tried to ban them outright. It was loud, it was bruising, and it was loved. What England did in the 1800s wasn't to invent the game. It was to tame it, to sit down, agree on one shared set of rules, cleanly separate it from rugby, and write it all down. That act of standardizing is what created the sport we now share with 4 billion people. England gave football its grammar. But the language, humans had already been speaking it for thousands of years. Which brings us back to the question, how did ancient humans invent soccer? And the honest, beautiful answer is that they didn't invent it once. They invented it again, and again, and again. A Chinese soldier kicking a ball to stay sharp. A Greek scrambling in the dust. A Japanese courtier keeping it gracefully in the air. A Maya player staking everything on a stone court. None of them knew the others existed. They were separated by oceans and centuries, and yet every one of them arrived at the very same idea, that there is something deeply, irresistibly human about chasing a ball with your feet. Soccer isn't really an invention at all. It's an instinct. Every kid who has ever kicked a stone down a sidewalk was answering the same ancient call. The World Cup unfolding right now is just the latest match in a game humanity has been playing for over 2,000 years. So the next time someone tells you football was born in England, you'll know the real story is far older and far stranger. And it makes you wonder what else we've been doing since the very beginning. Like, when did ancient humans tell the first lie?